First, thanks for inviting me here to speak. And it's great to be in Madrid. I think it's the second time I've been here from previous projects. But I just wanted to say as well, there's going to be a series of images, and a lot of those images are from work that's been done at Tate Britain and Tate Modern for the last sort of 2 to 3 years. So my name's Mark Miller, as mentioned, young convener for young people's programs. I also lead a national program called Circuit. So it was quite interesting to have these questions and be part of this conversation and part of this conference, simply because I think a lot of the questions that were thrown are really resonant, if you want, across the UK, Europe, and other countries that I've been to, which is kind of really, I suppose, where do we move towards the relationship with young people and museums and galleries, but then also the bigger conversations about the role of museums and galleries in the 21st century. But I just want to add a bit of context, I suppose, to what I'm going to talk about, which is, I suppose Tate has been working with young people in a peer-led way in terms of young people affecting programs since 1994. And that's developed over many years with different curators, different types of young people. And a lot of this work was kind of set in the context of, if you want, social and cultural policy, how young people are supported through the national curriculum, so more formal curriculum within schools and colleges, but then also a kind of, if you want, a social and political role. So in terms of how can cultural institutions support young people in a positive way. So thinking about the problems that might arise, whether it's through family, whether it's through crime, whether it's through education. So we've seen how galleries can play a role in that. So I suppose connected to that is how the learning program, which is a team I'm part of, respond to the vision, if you want, and the mission of Tate, which is around the understanding and enjoyment of historic, modern and contemporary art. And then within that, there is a learning strategy, which is about reflective practices, criticality, art and ideas, and of course, kind of access to all. So in that sense, our work with young people is quite central and connected to one government policy, the role of art, museums and galleries, but then also the wider vision and mission of Tate. So kind of phrase this one as influence and impact, because I think it's really important that young people are able to impact institutions. I'm going to tell you about Circuit, which is a national program. We received £5 million from a foundation called Paul Hamlin. And this was kind of sparked by the riots. I don't know if you know, there were riots in London and across England in 2011, and lots of conversations were being had about the positive representation of young people throughout. So our director and learning director thought about how could we think about a program which impacts or enables young people to have a kind of social positive representation. So the programs strand out about 7 different national sites. And the program is really about change. So it's about change in these institutions like ours. It's about change in practice. So in terms of how we deliver programs, why we deliver programs. And it's also about how this network of galleries can share practice as well. And I think core to that sharing of practice is also about how we centralize the work with young people. So it's not this idea of an outreach project that happens once every now and again, or it's working with specific people. It's about how we work with young people with complex and diverse backgrounds and enable their work to be really central to the organization. So rather than it being peripheral or an add-on or in the studio, that actually this work is really central to how we work across institutions. And then when I talk about impact, it's about kind of visible, physical impact of young people within those spaces. It's also about how we impact governance within organizations. So if you can make connections with trustees, the curatorial and artistic program, visitor experience, the widest gamut of people who we can influence and be aware of the work that we do with young people. And it's also, as I mentioned before, about positive representation of young people. And I think that's one of the most important things where there are assumptions about young people's roles, responsibilities within organizations, but there's also the positive work and contribution that young people make to our institutions consistently. And what I'd say as well is that when I speak about the kind of London program in terms of Tate Britain and Tate Modern, which is connected to Circuit, is that our systems are kind of based on values. So it's kind of looking at our personal, professional values. As I lead a team of 8 people, and within that team, we all have slightly different values, slightly different motivations for doing this work. But actually, the way in which we construct our aims, if you want, is all around our values. And we discuss these values as part of our research and development of our program and our skills. And we base that, just this idea of values and the motivations of our team. Why are we doing this work? Who are we doing this work for? And who is it going to impact? So the values for young people's programs in London are diversity. And I say diversity in the sense of diversity in terms of the young people who contribute and participate in our programs, creative diversity as well, so in terms of how programs manifest themselves, what types of programs, what type of artists, what type of partnerships we have, and the whole gamut when you think of diversity in its widest sense, so gender, race, social, economic, class, disabilities, etc. So diversity is a really strong value which we hold within our programs. We also think about collaboration, and a lot of the other speakers have mentioned a lot of things that I'm going to talk about as well, which is really great to hear. But I think collaboration is core to the way that we practice. We collaborate with young people, we collaborate with varied organizations, so whether they're artists or artistic organizations or cultural organizations, or youth sector organizations, it's really important that we collaborate and we find a common ground. And I think those common grounds are also about, if you want, sort of reciprocal advocacy and the way in which we support each other. We support a network and develop a network that's around creating a positive way in which young people can interact in social context. There's also collective and peer-led, and I'm not sure if a lot of you know the idea of peer-led, and it's just this idea that a group of us, even in this room, some of us are peers, some are not, so we might share a similar age group, we might share similar ideals, but thinking about how young people can come together and form peer-led practice, so how they work together as a collective, how they share knowledge, how they learn from each other, how they develop program. And I think this idea of collective and peer-led is really core to the ethos of how we work with young people. So it's really about how these young people can develop, if you want, a kind of culture within the group for them to think about really why do we want to create this program? Does it fit with the aims and objectives of the wider context of young people's programs and the Tate vision? Are young people who come to these events going to have a really a positive experience? So I think there's this idea of how this collaboration, if you want, with young people in a collective way is really kind of a really long elongated learning process. So young people develop ideas together. And we really see these processes as art as a real catalyst for informal learning as well. And just kind of thinking about this idea of values, diversity, collaboration, and collective-led as well, is just this idea of authenticity. And I think that if we invite young people into institutions, then we really need to be, one, honest about what the availability and potential is, but then also that if we invite them to create programs, that it is their ideas and it's developed by them, whether it's collectively or independently, that the reproduction of those ideas are really authentic. You know, because I think that's the value I think a lot of young people bring to the table, which is this authenticity, their voice, their ideas, and their cultural experience. I also think about ownership as well. I think ownership is really important, and ownership comes after an authentic delivery, if you want, and how young people can actually see and acknowledge, and that they're being acknowledged by the institution, therefore creating a sense of ownership and belonging. And I think for young people who might not normally go to galleries traditionally, that's really important, as well as the wider context of young people. Autonomy in terms of their leadership and developing how they want to learn, how they learn, and actually enabling them to make decisions. I think as well within that, there is this really strong push towards interdisciplinary art practices. I think the idea that young people can look at art from different lenses, can think about ways in which they interpret art, whether it's through fashion, design, whether it's photography, whether it's performance art, whether it's audio, whether it's music with its various genres. I think interdisciplinary art practices or cross art platforms or cross disciplines is a really key way of engaging young people into the arts as well. And I think what it does is it also democratizes the space, it democratizes our ideals of culture. And I think with these programs that we're all thinking about and putting together, it's really also about how young people start to understand these institutions. So how we also demystify the institutions so they work behind the scenes. They understand that it's not all gloss and glitter, that there is, you know, there are some textures and there are some flaws, you know, within all our institutions, whether it's the systems, it's infrastructure. There's also a way in which those understanding or behind the scenes can be transferred into other organizations. So in some ways you kind of empower young people to understand organizational systems that can be shifted across other organizations as well. But I think also, you know, we shouldn't really be afraid of exposing ourselves or exposing our institutions, because I think young people usually know when you're being straight up or whether you're being honest, or, you know, they're probably the first people to be able to tell you, actually, that's not going to work. They might not tell you, but they might not come again, you know. So, I mean, I also think that the way in which we work with young people, essentially Tate Collective, they're young people, they're 15 to 25-year-olds. We don't recruit with any application process, so all they need to do is show interest. So we also think that young people do not necessarily need to be thinking about a career in the arts or the cultural sector. You know, they could be scientists, they could be chemists. I was speaking to a chemist earlier. They could be into astrophysics, they could be almost into anything, but I think essentially it's about young people having the opportunity to engage with these institutions and have the opportunity to also say no, they don't want to engage in these organizations as well. So we do targeted recruitment to schools and colleges. So we might pick specific schools, colleges, youth and community organizations, just so that we maintain the diversity of our group. Because as you can imagine in London, which is diverse anyway, is that you will get your usual suspects who are already interested in art and will come. So the way that we do that to balance that off is actually to be quite targeted to certain schools and colleges that we know, or youth organisations that we know will not necessarily see Tate as its first option. And we, myself, or some of the curators I work with might go to these schools and colleges, do a presentation, and then recruit some of those young people who are interested, and they then become part of Tate Collective. So we've got a core group of around 20 young people. We've got membership of about 100. And when I say core, they're the ones who come really regularly and contribute to programs. We probably produce around 16 to 17 events per year directly. They vary from workshops to conferences to large-scale events that attract around 5,000 people, smaller ones, maybe 25 young people. And it really varies in terms of timing and when we deliver those programs. So some young people have been at Tate for, I don't know, some have been all the way as long as I've been there. I've been there 8 years. Some people have been there for 7 years. Some come for a month. Some might leave straight away. Some stay for a year, etc. So it really varies in terms of the timing that people do. We meet bi-weekly, and then they also have working group meetings. So sometimes we have big projects. For instance, they recently curated a show, a display, BP Spotlight display at Tate Britain. So we had a working group for that project over the last 2 years. And that's been a kind of smaller group of about 6 young people who've managed to really focus on that project. So when we have the bigger projects, which are quite a few each year, we have working groups and then we have a general meeting to be able to sort of manage the workload. So this group kind of really meets to construct and steer the program. They deliver a constant stream of program with their ideas. Their ideas are being developed. The real programs are all about kind of creating meaning, exchange of knowledge, and that's also how they exchange knowledge with an audience as well as themselves. And core to our practice as well is this idea of collaboration with art and artists. And I think when we think about interdisciplinary and we think about bringing other art forms into the space, core to that is really art and the artist. So thinking about the response to the collection, whether it's historic, whether it's modern, whether it's contemporary, it's really core that we invite artists in to respond, whether it's by audio or whether it's by performance. And I think there's also just this idea of the imagined, virtual and physical. And what I mean by that is just this idea that now I think young people are at a point where they really understand this kind of, if you want, a transvisual experience, how you can have multiple experiences in one space. So whether that's digital, audio, and static, if you want, kind of two-dimensional work. I think at the moment, I think that's also where galleries and museums are going, but I think young people are central to how that develops. Just this idea that, you know, our experience of visual culture now are very multiple, and I think our physical and audio experiences are very varied as well. So it's how they're able to find that balance between this idea of the virtual and analog as well. And I think this idea of, if you want, diversifying cultural productions and knowledge is key to the way in which we think about our shifts in barriers of participation for young people. I think the offer of a social space, the offer of a contemporary space which considers their cultural experiences, an offer that's welcoming, an offer that's able to enable them to participate and contribute at any one point to your offer. So whether it's an event, whether it's an exhibition. These images are from, I mentioned earlier, it's called the BP Spotlight display, and this is a display that at Tate Britain, which Tate Collective have curated. And we've had a series of events over the next 6 months which are part of display. So we invite artists, illustrators, printmakers, musicians to respond to this display. And the display looks at, if you want, the idea of reappropriation and representation of visual culture. So how do we experience visual culture at the moment, and the relationship between Tumblr and the salon hang. And as you can see, it's kind of in an old school salon hang style, but then they're looking at the relationship between how we navigate images or curate images on Tumblr. And there's also this idea that the audiences, I think you might be able to see in the background, there's 3 video screens which are part of the collection, which are part of the display, and they demonstrate this idea that the participants and the hierarchy, if you want, of art and artists is that we take submissions in, and those works are shown amongst the collection artist works. We've selected 56 works from the collection from this display, all British artists. We couldn't hang all 56, so we've ended up hanging, I think it's 44 when we came to do the handling. And it ranges across, I think the oldest work is, I think you might be able to see it in the background, is that it's called A Black Man, and that's from 1810. And then it goes through to 99. I think the oldest or the latest work is a Jason Evans. So there's kind of a series of photographs, prints that resonate with the culture and the visual cultural experiences of young people now. And that's this idea of the display. And I think also that these galleries and museums and the offer that we make are also about how they are part of the wider ecology, I think, of social makeup and political makeup as well. So how we consider galleries and museums is really important. I think that young people are able to think about their current experiences and able to bring that into the space and make the galleries quite aware of these concerns or of the positives, negatives, etc. And sort of thinking about, if you want, the future of museums and galleries, that I think we really want, and we really aim to have young people at this space and create spaces and forums where they can challenge this idea of the gallery, what it represents, what it is, what it could be as well. Just kind of this idea of the traditional notions of a gallery. And this image is of this, it's called the Space, and it's at Tate Britain, and we have a learning gallery at Tate Britain, and it's central in the gallery as well. Tate Collective have constructed a space which they see as a social space, because they were talking about the kind of welcome of museums and how it isn't in terms of Tate, you know, when we're not doing events, there might be nothing else happening. So how do you have this idea of a consistent program? How do you direct young people to a space where they can hang out, they can charge their phones, there's etch-a-sketches, there's books, there's projections, there's audio as well. So there's just this idea of how you might start to think about, and we're constantly thinking about it for the next few years until we launch Tate Modern. It's just kind of what a space is, what is a gallery space, how is it multi-purpose, does it serve other purposes apart from the engagement with art, you know? So within that, part of our reach, I suppose, and our push for the circuit program is really to represent the voice, the creativity, and also the critique of young people and their social and cultural experiences. So this is quite a sort of elongated process of thinking about the future of museums and galleries. And I also think, and we were sort of talking earlier as well about this, there's kind of assumptions that young people need to connect with contemporary art, and they also need to connect to digital platforms as well. And what I think I've found in my experience, and especially with the display that I showed you before, was actually that digital, audio, analog, the whole thing is all and that's what I mean, like talking about transvisual, it's all one experience. I don't think, they don't want digital to be this box that's put to the side and yeah, you know, you deal with digital. They want a multiple experience. So this idea of the display that they created was really about bringing young people back to the physical, the textured experience of the collection, but then also navigating it through a digital experience as well. You know, so they kind of share the same space. So I don't think there's any other. And I also think this idea that historic, modern and contemporary are always and always will be relevant in terms of their narratives, their craft, if you want, and also their relevance now. You know, a lot of the stories that happened in the past are still happening now. So I think it's just how we enable young people to understand and share that as well. And I also think that young people are key to creating space for informal thoughts on, if you want, the kind of intellectual, social and political relevance of galleries and museums as well. And I think at the moment there is kind of a real shift and a real thought to how we understand that and how that actually manifests itself within our galleries and museums. And I do think that we're getting to the point where, as I mentioned before about governance, I think if we can enable trustees, arts policy, cultural policy makers to understand, if you want, the value and the experience of our programs, then those shifts can happen. And the circuit program is really tasked with that. We have a really strong research and evaluation element. The program is going to run for 4 years, and after those 4 years, we'll be able to get a sense of, you know, what is the experience of art and young people? How can they shift and change organizations? And it's really important that we are able, at the end of that project, to be able to take some, or get some, a little bit closer to defining the experience of art, young people, but then also how we can impact and contribute to social and cultural policy. And I also think that young people are really key to how we consider our connections to new spaces, new museums, and this is an image from the tanks, and this space was curated by Tate Collective as well. The tanks at Tate Modern launched, they're closed now, but it was this idea of this neutral space that art could be represented, video, installation, but handing that space over to young people was quite a moment, I think, for young people within the context of Tate, because they were able to really consider themselves as the future cultural instigators, thinking they're going to be our future curators, they'll be our future visitors, they will be our future critics as well. And I think that's part of the reason why I feel it's so important that young people are central to, or have the opportunity to engage with our cultural institutions and are able to really question the status quo. I mean, at the moment at Tate, lots of young people have been asked to really think about connecting to communities. What are the connections to advocacy? How can we build really strong partnerships? And what are the best ways to do that? These images are from a project that Tate Collective did with Tate Enterprises. And Tate Enterprises kind of sits slightly outside of, if you want, Tate's core budget. It's kind of about enterprise. It's the shops, it's the sales, it's the merchandise, etc. So they asked me whether Tate Collective could do this pop-up store, which was part of, I don't know if you've been to London, but there's a tube station at Old Street. Old Street is East London. East London is quite trendy and hip with designers, etc. So they asked whether Tate Collective could do this pop-up shop for 1 week. But for me, it was a really great opportunity for the older members of Tate Collective to actually project manage that and actually work with Tate Enterprises to develop this program and to do this kind of connection to outreach and develop a program of events that happened, the form of the shop, the shape of the shop, what products were going to be sold in the shop. And for Tate Enterprises, it was a really good pilot for them to experiment with new formats and working off-site and thinking about merchandise and thinking about the role that young people programs might play in that, you know. And again, it's kind of thinking about income generation and what that means now while everyone's going through some massive economic shifts as well. And I think core to these as well is kind of the partnerships constructed through Tate and the partnerships constructed through Tate Collective are so important. I mean, partnerships and connections and networks are probably the biggest, I don't know, the most important thing in terms of how we enable ourselves to expand our audiences, how we enable ourselves to be known and accessible, and how young people actually know which partnerships to forge to build a wider audience and enable other young people to engage. I think now with the question of future museums, there's this idea of thinking about the external and the internal. So thinking about how we do connect outside of our institutions is a massive task. And I think someone mentioned earlier this idea of the gallery of the city. You know, I think that's a really important point because actually now I don't think we can operate in a silo anymore as galleries and museums. We need to be connected to partnerships, to our role inside our galleries, but then also how we're viewed, perceived, and valued outside. Young people at the moment are being asked to really be part of a lot of the decision-making processes at Tate. They've been asked to be part of governance, boards, trustees, and I'm not quite sure whether that's the right move. I think for me, the idea of young people on boards, it's got to be valuable, and it's got to be the right sort of context, because I think sometimes you can have young people on boards, but actually what power do they have? You know, are they there as a token? Do they say, young people in the room, young person in the room, can you tell me what you think? You know, so until the context is right, then we'll go for it, I think, in terms of Tate. But, you know, I wouldn't want a young person to be on a board as a token. It has to be action. There has to be actions formed after young people represent themselves or make suggestions to the organizations. And I think also essentially young people need to learn something as well from that, for me. And I think also just this idea that young people have this massive impact, if you want, in terms of how they see themselves and their cultural connections, and how they have a real insight into the future, into what may happen and what we think culture is about. And I think they really are the way in which we start to configure and think about future museums. They really need to be, I mean, already are in some cases part of the conversation in terms of where we're going as organizations. I think young people are really the mediators and negotiators between the institution, the public, artists, and they really are the way in which we can start to produce some kind of physical and visible impact as well. And I think there's just this idea that when we create programs and programs over the years, it's kind of often used to be in studios, you know, or it used to be off-site, or, you know, you might bring a group of young offenders into a gallery and they'll be in a studio somewhere, or you might bring a school group, or whatever it is. And I think that really now, with Circuit and with young people's programs, there is this thing that actually young people need to be really visible and physical within all those cultural institutions as well. I'm going to sort of, because I feel like I've been talking for ages, but I'm going to show a video, and it will kind of, because I think sometimes when you talk you can't visualize what's happening, and we're all visual, well, most of us are visual people in here, so I'm going to show a video which kind of gives you a sense of what we do, just a part of a video, and then I'll stop. This program really offers an opportunity to show young people's languages, codes, the way they communicate, the way they utilize technology, art, culture, and to demonstrate how young people's engagement with these platforms can show their aspirations, their knowledge, and all the culture they can produce. The idea is to create a national network for the visual arts to engage over 4 years, 80,000 young people.
What I think arts-based programs help us to do, beyond the product at the end of it, is to raise levels of self-esteem, to increase engagement in things, to develop passion.
There has to be success from within, and a belief that making a decision, that having an idea, that changing your environment is success.
And it also offers them an opportunity to express some of their feelings and emotions about their life in a creative and artistic way.
The structure of the program has come out of really projects like Seen Through, working with harder to reach young people, and also working with Tate Collective.
Tate Collective is a group of young people, 15 to 25 years old, and we organize and curate different events and workshops for young people. I really like Tate Collective meetings, like pushing forward ideas, deciding which artist we would like to use.
I've joined Tate because of that, and they mix everyone together, and they all interested in one subject, that is arts.
We have 4 Tates across the country. I imagine there's quite a few young people all being part of Tate Collective. I would love to be a part of some kind of exchange, just once, just to see what they're like.
I'm involved in Tate because I love it. I've been involved with various projects.
It's a beautiful hot day today at Loud Tate. Damien Hirst likes to portray one thing but also make it contradict to another. So that's why the event's called Oxymoron.
I like to get involved with the actual planning.
Label would be the best event I've been involved in. We put like a whole bunch of ideas in and it came out so well.
We thought about label, who am I, who are you, where do you come from, what do you do, and all this type of stuff, and that's where it really came from.
Oh, it is incredible, just working with the artists, all the planning and liaising and everything about it has just been so exciting.
We had Soulful Creative come to do like a little mural. There was performances from Shaka, Speech to Val.
Young people get a bad rep. When you come to places like this, it reminds you that there's just so much talent and there's so much wanting to learn new things and to be a part of, something that allows them to express themselves.
It was a good feeling that we've managed to make people so happy, and so we felt proud of what we'd done.
It's extremely important that young people have physical impact on the spaces of the galleries, and that it's not a kind of studio or sidelined in some ways, that they can actually respond to the spaces, and these spaces, of course, inhabited by art. There is a real focus to engage young people who would not normally attend the galleries, and young people who perhaps might not be engaged in education.
Young people in care, they are the responsibility of society as a whole, and by making them part of an institution like Tate, it makes a change in their lives.
Stop there. Yeah, so thanks for listening. What I would say is that you can check out the circuit website, or you can contact us through that site as well. So let me know if you have any questions, and we're going to have a panel discussion afterwards. So thanks again. Cheers.